We are super glad that you're here. We are thrilled to share with you a little bit about what we've got. I want to tell you a little bit about where we're going to go today and what we hope to accomplish. But I would be remiss if I didn't start by just telling you a little bit about our journey as a team and as a sense of collaborators. So I am happily a former classroom teacher. I was somebody that actually went into this field completely by accident. The whole thing was an accident, but it's worked out pretty well. So I was in a marriage, family, and child counseling program as a master's student, and I had a friend who was a principal at a middle school, and she's like, I don't have a teacher yet. Could you come cover this class? And it was 7th and 8th grade. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking back to when I was in school. I love school. I, sat in the front row. My kindergarten teacher, Miss Colton, used to give out the Good Bee of the Day award. I never got one in 179 days of instruction because I couldn't be quiet. But I'm thinking that's my vision. It turns out that was not the experience in middle school, shockingly, right? And when I rolled up into this little parking lot, there was a classroom in the parking lot. And then after that, there was a big gate that you walk through to get to the rest of the school. And what was the class, by the way? True story, that is right. It was a self-contained class for kids with exceptionalities. And long story short, that 2 days stretched into 2 weeks, and there was a wonderful 14-year-old girl. Her name was Tamika, and at the end of that time, I kept saying, they're going to find you a real teacher. I'm not a real teacher. I don't really know what I'm doing. I thought a lesson plan or lesson was something your father taught you if you really screwed up at the end of the day. But at the end of that 2-week period, Tamika just said, she's like, girlfriend, I think you're doing a really good job, and I think you should stay. And I'm like, okay. So I quit my one praise statement. That's pretty much all it took. I was living in a lean reinforcement condition. That 2 weeks changed my entire life. And when we talk about systematic screening and this system, I want you to know that this isn't from one state, from one district, the journey that you're going to hear about. We've had the opportunity to partner with amazing people like you since 1996 to build this integrated system. And a big piece of this system is systematic screening. And so our goal today is to talk about screening, systematically looking fall, winter, and spring, and we'll get into the details. But we want to first set the stage by talking about the system that you're working in. And we want to make sure we have clarity on that, because it would not be okay to screen and then think, damn, we've got nothing. But next year, we're starting tier 2. We don't want to do that. We want to have a plan in place, so we will talk about that. And then we're going to get down into the practicalities of moving into this system. Now, today, I'd like to first find out, are any of you in a system where you are already screening, like using either academics? How many of you academic screening, fall, winter, spring? Okay. How many of you are doing either screening for internalizing or externalizing or social emotional well-being, fall, winter, spring? Great, awesome, that's really good. And we'll talk a little bit about the resources that are available to you for doing that. On PBIS.org, you're going to find a bunch of resources. We're going to show you where you can find those later today. And we're also introducing you to CI, the number 3T.org, CI3T.org, and Rebecca will tell you more about that in a minute. But what we want to do is connect you today with some big ideas. Most importantly, we're going to hear about real live implementers who have done this. They've built the system, they've put it in practice, and we want to learn from them. And then following this, we will be heading to a conversation on screening for anybody that's already signed up or wants to join us. It's a whole conversation for Q&A on systematic screening. And then after that, Rebecca is leading a poster at the poster session that will just straight up give you all the resources, and you can come check those out. So let's take a look at potentially the most beautiful picture in the world is Amber Smith. Let's just take a moment for that glamour shot right here.
That's the power of AI.
I know. I've been on a Zoom filter for the last multiple years, and I actually caught a glimpse of myself in the restroom, and it's like, holy mother, what happened right there? Those last 3 years have changed me in so many ways, but I want to praise God for the pandemic pants and the filter on Zoom. So Rebecca is going to walk us through a little bit about systematic screening and starting with this framework. And we'd like you, as you listen to this first part, to think about the framework that you have in your setting. And you're going to hear, I'm sure, about some of the wonderful things that you're already doing and maybe some little nuggets of things you might want to enhance. So let's take it away.
Thanks. And I will just start by saying I'm significantly less funny than Kathleen. So I apologize in advance for that. But as she said, as we start the conversation, we want to situate the context around this CI3T framework, because what we're going to talk about, the work is all situated within this CI3T framework. And when we think about that, it kind of stems from this commitment that we have as educators to promoting positive out in our schools, in our districts, in our communities. And we know that students who are struggling with some type of internalizing or externalizing behavior challenges, there are more of those kids than are served under the title of special education. And so it really presents this opportunity or this commitment that we have to shift to a systems perspective to look for, to identify, to support these students. And so we want to make sure that we are learning about and implementing and using systems that are identifying those students at the earliest sign of concern so that we can provide that support with the goal being better outcomes for students. So when we talk about CI3T, it stands for Comprehensive, Integrated, Three-Tiered Models of Prevention. And there will be a competition at the end of this to see who can say it the fastest 3 times in a row. So just get ready for that. Yeah. So when you think about CI3T, the main part, I was told not to walk in front of the screen, so I'm going to stay right here. That middle part is thank you, the behavioral component. So that is PBIS. So if you're working at a school or you're at a school that's implementing CI3T, you are implementing positive behavioral interventions and supports. And then we broaden that a little bit to include academics. So you're thinking about MTSS at this point, right, across those 3 tiers. And with CI3T, you're extending it even further to include that social domain. So at tier 1, you are thinking about how all 3 of those domains interact with each other. And a big component of this plan, the name of the game, if you will, is data-informed decision-making. And that is true for students as they move throughout the tiers. And the cool thing about CI3T, which maybe you'll hear me say, 20 times in this 10 minutes that I have, is that data-informed decision-making also applies to adults in the building. So you're looking systematically to see where might we need to focus our efforts for professional learning, for things like that, to support teachers in this system as well. So we're just going to briefly go over these pieces. We know that tier 1, the goal is to have about 80% of students kind of responding to that tier. And I appreciated what Lucille said in the keynote this morning, which was for tier 1, all means all, right? When we think about that 80%, it's not 80% of students are receiving tier 1 instruction, 100% of students are receiving tier 1 instruction, and we would anticipate that that is enough to support about 80% of students in the school. And then if there are, or rather when there are students that need a little bit more support, we have a plan in place for tier 2. Kathleen always says tier 2 is not a tragedy, it's an expectation, right? And we have a plan that's in place for responding to students who might need a little bit more help. And I think sometimes there's this idea that tier 2 is always small group instruction, or it's always kind of this secondary location that you send kids to receive this instruction. But we kind of challenge that in CI3T. It absolutely can be, but it doesn't always have to be, right? Tier 2 can be something that teachers are doing in their classroom when they're pulling up their students' data and thinking about what they can shift, what they can intensify for that student in the school. The other thing that we talk about a lot is the language that we use around tier 2. So we always say that there are no tier 2 kids. There are kids that need tier 2 supports across maybe many or maybe just a few different areas, right? I might be rocking it in reading and tier 1 is absolutely not for me. But oh my gosh, if you put me in front of a math workbook, I will just need a lot of support, right? So I'm not a tier 2 kid, I'm just a kid that needs a little bit of help or some tier 2 support for math. And that is true for tier 3 as well. So as we think about increasing, right, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, we're thinking about the level of intensity. So at tier 3, it's really individualized support for students, and it's more time and maybe labor intensive. And in this CI3T model, tier 3 is not only special education, right? These supports are available for any student in that building that might need that level of intensity. And as we move across and throughout those tiers, we're really thinking again about those 3 domains: academic, behavior, and social, and how we can integrate those to provide the most comprehensive, see what I did there? Comprehensive support for students, because we know that there are multiple needs that students show up with, and so we want to work in this integrated fashion to get the biggest bang for our buck. So we're thinking about academic curriculums, right? You're implementing a validated curriculum. You're benchmarking to check in to see how students are doing and who might need some extra support. With the behavioral component, again, you're implementing this PBIS framework. So you are establishing and teaching and practicing these expectations, and you're reinforcing students for meeting those expectations. And then we get to that social component. So again, ideally a validated curriculum is adopted and it is taught at tier 1, so that every kid in that building, in your building, learns the language, the skills, so that if you have a student that might need a little bit of extra support in terms of their social skills for tier 2, when they go to practice that on the playground, in music, everybody is familiar with what that looks like, right? So think about how beneficial that is, or how many times you might have been in a situation where you're like, I am working my tail off with this kid to try to learn these social skills, but when they go back into this classroom, nobody knows what they're talking about. And so the benefit of teaching that at tier 1 is that it really levels the playing field for students in the school. So, schools that are implementing CI3T go through a year-long building process before they start implementing, where they are doing just that. They're building this CI3T implementation manual. So what we call CI3T leadership teams come together and they look at what's currently in place at the school, what pieces of the things that are happening they want to keep, what they might want to shift, and what's developed is this implementation manual. And along the way, there is feedback from faculty and staff, so it's not just one group of people deciding what's going to be in there, but there are multiple people that come together to kind of build this plan. So when we think about all of those different pieces we just talked about, right? The academics, the behavior, the social, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, all right, we throw out all these plans into the universe, and then what happens with them? They just get stored in the back of our brain and we hope that people implement them? No. We put them in this very nice implementation manual so that the expectations, the routines, the procedures are clear across everybody that's going to be in that building. So students, faculty and staff, administrators, and your families and communities as well. And so those 3 domains, academic, behavior, and social, are laid out, and the expectations or the roles for each group is specifically laid out. So in the academic component, you might list out the low intensity strategies, right, as a way to increase engagement and minimize disruption in schools. When you're thinking about the behavior responsibilities, you might want to think about plans for responding to challenging behaviors in classrooms that are respectful and still kind of positive towards students. Maybe not kind of positive, right? Just actually positive. Yeah, let's just be nice to kids probably is the best thing. Yeah, good point. And then there's also clarity about what is taught and when. So people aren't spinning their wheels trying to find resources or trying to look at what's happening. It's really clear across the board what is taking place. And then you might think, okay, well, we have all these procedures and we've written them all down. What do we do now? Great question. In the plan, you have a section for procedures for teaching. So now that you've laid out all of these routines, how are you going to teach that to the different people, to your faculty and staff, to your students, to your administrators and your families and your communities? There's also a plan for reinforcing. We know that it's important to acknowledge kids when they're meeting expectations. It's also important to acknowledge teachers. Educators have very hard jobs, and it's important to recognize them for doing the good work that they are doing. And so there's a specific plan where you think about, what are we going to do to acknowledge people for meeting the expectations and implementing this plan? And then there are procedures for monitoring. So you have all these things in place, and you want to look to see what is actually happening. And this section, procedures for monitoring, is where systematic screening falls. So in a CI3T system, you're looking at social validity, which is how people feel about the plan. You're looking at treatment integrity, which I know Lucille talked about this morning, right? You also want to see, is it happening? Because before we say something isn't working or we need to replace it with something else, we want to make sure that it's actually being put into place as intended. So in fall and in spring, at the Tier 1 level in a CI3T system, you're getting input from everybody in the building to see how things are going. And then you're checking in with kids academically and behaviorally to see how they're doing and to get to see who might need a little bit of extra support. And that is what you use to make decisions about who might need those Tier 2 interventions. So another piece of that implementation you'll find are these intervention grids, where it's really clearly laid out for that school what supports are available for kids, and how are they gonna, how might they be included in that intervention, right? What does the entry criteria say? What does the exit criteria say? All of those are laid out to make sure that data is driving the decision about who is getting put into these interventions, and tracking to see how progress is going. And then that same procedure, that same clarity exists at Tier 3, right? So what do those kind of more intensive interventions look like, and how are they gonna be implemented? And so that has set the stage for systematic screening. So I'll hand it back to Kathleen, who will walk us through some of those details.
Shout out to Rebecca. Let's give it up. You! Sorry for the recording, man. Excellent overview. And so whatever your system is, the big idea, can you hear me if I put this in here? Okay, awesome. So whatever your system is, the deal is get a playbook. Because we know, like when you were watching people nod their heads, like I got that, I got that, I got that. And I think most schools have really excellent pockets of excellence. Most schools do not have one document that says this is how we do it. And if this wasn't being recorded, I would break into Montel Jordan's song, This Is How We Do It, but I'll save that for the poster session. But when we think about screening, like the work that Amy Henry's done, Jen Roland-Hagen's in the back, many of you, you've dedicated your lives to creating clarity of what that Tier 1 experience is for everybody. You heard Lucille talk about that idea of integration. And I am so impressed with how many people have committed to that through the years. And I've also been impressed in our partnerships to watch that people are embracing the idea of being bold and literally checking in fall and in spring to see what the adult experience is. Because as Rebecca mentioned, we are changing the experience for students by first changing the experience for adults. And we do that twice a year in terms of treatment integrity, checking on, is the teaching happening? Is the reinforcement happening? Are data being used? When you fill out your tiered fidelity inventory, and shout out to those of you who are participating in that test for the next iteration of that, we don't want to check that just once, in my professional opinion, because we know that over time we can either wane or we can accelerate in how we're implementing, so we want to check on that twice a year. And oftentimes people will say, if we're doing treatment integrity and social validity just twice a year, why do we need to do screening 3 times a year? And we're going to talk about that today. We want to make sure that we have that quick look at the student experience between fall and winter to see, are they responding to what's happening at Tier 1, and so that you have the data to see what's happening in your system to see if you need a system shift. So we want to use those multiple sources of data along with academic screening and then the other data that you already collect as part of regular school practices. We are rich in the information we collect. We don't often look at it, though, in an integrated way. And fortunately, the world is starting to prioritize this. And I will say that when the pandemic happened several years ago, and fortunately that's more in the rearview mirror now, the districts that we got to partner with previously, prior to the pandemic, we heard, I was a little bit worried about, like, oh my gosh, like, what's that gonna look like? We had relationships with 35 schools. Some were involved in a series of descriptive studies. They were in 6 different states, and it was very interesting. The first question that came back from people was, how do we monitor fidelity now that this is all gonna happen remotely? Because they understood the value of making sure kids got what they needed. They were also relieved that they already had data on every single student in their community. At the preschool level, there's a downward extension they use called the Student Risk Screening Scale for Early Childhood. And all of our district partners also use the Student Risk Screening Scale for internalizing and externalizing behavior. And it's not just about moving kids through the tiers, it's also about looking to see what the needs are of your system. So when we think about screening, I want to level the playing field a little bit in terms of our understanding, and I know that many of you are already screening, and before they describe what they're doing in their respective districts, some big ideas behind this is that we want to be working towards 3 times a year. And when we talk about screenings in terms of supporting kids' well-being, right now in this conversation, we're going to talk about teacher-completed measures. Because teachers are mandated reporters. If they thought that a child was a danger to themselves or others or in harm's way, they would have already reported that. True? That's the part you say, right, thank you. And so you absolutely could also have other measures like that are student completed or family completed, and those are excellent too. Reliable, valid screening tools. In fact, my daughter, Katie Lane, who's a grad student at UConn, there's a systematic review of the literature she's just done that looked at all the available systematic screening tools that are in existence, looked at the reliability and validity. And that's under review right now, and I think that's going to be a real great resource for people as they're making decisions about what to pick, because we can't just pick anything. We've got to pick something with enough reliability data and validity to know that those scores work, like in your community with the kids that you're serving. And P.S., she is getting married in 3.5 weeks, and no, I don't plan to lose 5 pounds between now and then. So when you're thinking about screening tools, we are talking today about teacher completed. And you've got big decisions to make. And that whole CI3T model that Rebecca just described to you, I want you to know that the people that go through that building process include a principal, 2 general education teachers, a special education teacher, another person that can support implementation, a family member, and their child. And it's not like there's like a kids table, so to speak, where the kids work together in a couple of those sessions, but the parent voice is included in the selection of systematic screening. As we have this conversation and you hear about these amazing things, I want to be very clear, screening is not a secret. So we need to make sure that just like you screen for vision, for hearing, for academics, behavior, and it's like in the medical field, like when you do mammograms, when you do PSA testing, we do that because we want to look for concern at the very first sign of concern, and not just within a child, but within a system. If your data show that you've got more than 20% of kids in your building having higher than average internalizing issues, we need to address that at tier 1. That's not like connecting a bunch of kids. And sometimes people will reach out and say, Kathleen, you're gonna be so proud of us. We got 42% of our kids at, in intervention. I'm just like gonna say, dude, if you're not drinking before noon, you might, we need to make sure that we're using and leveraging our resources efficiently and effectively. As you're thinking about what you're currently doing in your practice, I would invite you to ask yourself, do people know what your screening tool is? Are they aware of the psychometrics behind it? Do they know that you're benchmarking 3 times a year? How is that getting communicated? And we want to do that carefully and correctly because we do know that you wouldn't share item level data from screening because that's not going to be used to shape instruction. So you want to make sure for whatever tool you've selected, the information is being garnered together and you've picked something that is not just convenient for community, although that is very important. Social validity meaning something that's practical, it works. I believe in the goals, the procedures, and the outcomes. You need to make sure that it works. And by that I mean there are buckets of studies done in terms of looking at how fall scores predict end-of-the-year outcomes for kids. There are data for various screening tools, and it varies by tool. So a lot of the work that we've been able to invest in, thanks to the generosity of the Institute for Education Sciences, has been on a free access screening tool called the Student Risk Screening Scale for Internalizing and Externalizing Behavior. And I'm happy to say that there's multiple studies now done by multiple research teams, and there are data to show that this teacher-completed tool that takes less than 15 minutes to screen your school, not a kid, so like a teacher can do their whole classroom in a very short period of time, that those fall scores for elementary, middle, and high actually predict the number of office discipline referrals a student will earn over time. It predicts the number of days they're in in-school suspension. It also predicts the number of nurse visits, and it's not that the nurse is a bad person, but the fact that they're missing class and needing to be going there is a concern. And they also predict academic outcomes for kids. And we have studies under review right now with a sample of 24,250 elementary kids, and another study with 17,000 plus middle and high school kids. And that's under review, so don't go change any practices right now, that those fall data also predict referrals to special education. Teachers are incredibly accurate. So I'm telling you that because when you start to hear about what they're doing right now as they're launching their CI3T system and using screening data are not used to exclude. They should not ever be, that shouldn't happen. It should be used to shape instruction. So it's not like, oh, you've been screened, you're not gonna go on this trip. But I have to say, as a mother of two, and as a researcher, I am deeply appreciative of systematic screening. And I feel confident that we would find kids with acting out issues, no sweat. The good news is they suit up, they show up, they're hardly ever sick. God bless them, right? But what I really worry about is kids with internalizing issues, because if we do not go out and look, we will miss them. Great work by Kent McIntosh and Catherine Bradshaw has taught us office discipline referrals is not going to be the thing that moves those kids through the tiered systems. We need to actually look for them. And I also understand the feeling of, are you kidding me? Like, you want me to find more kids with challenging behavior right now? I want to remind you they're already there. So let's find them and let's support them at the first sign of concern. And you can use data, school-wide data, to look at snapshots at time. We can break it down by grade level and through some really good integrated systems now. And these are fictitious kids' names, you're gonna be able to do things like look at multiple sources of data. And I'm watching these amazing tech companies partner with districts to be able to actually look to say, like, show me all the kids that have good attendance and perhaps internalizing issues, et cetera. And we wanna make sure that we're looking for kids and using that information to shape instruction. So when you're thinking about benchmarking fall and winter and spring, it's not just to have data to file, it's data to inform instruction for the kids and inform professional learning experiences for the adults in the building and communicate with family members. And I wanted to show you visually, these are real data from real schools. This is an example of one elementary school, and you look at, this is externalizing behaviors over time. And this is, as you watch that, the bottom base, look at fall 20. So we're coming out of the pandemic, and in this school, they actually had very, very few kids that had really significant challenging behaviors. We are currently partnering with 36 schools. We see this trend all the time right now. Because what were we doing? Go back to what Lucille was talking about. Expectations were crystal clear in classrooms, 6 feet apart, hand sanitizer, washing your hands. Expectations were taught, practiced, and reinforced. We also are seeing this trend over time where you're, of course, seeing an increase in some of the challenging behaviors. And now some schools that have data all the way back, not only can you look at it this way, they can also go take pictures of like looking backwards to see how kids are progressing over time. I also think a benefit, like in this particular school, one illustration is even though things may feel harder than during the pandemic, if you look back, they're still rocking close to 80% of the kids screening in the low risk category. And this is not just something for elementary. You can break it down like this to look to see where additional needs are. I know Amber and Poppy both use this instructionally to help people to see, like, here for second grade, that might be below 80%, but I also want to think about the tier 3 needs for those 5 kindergartners, and I might do something that like Hill Walker's program first step to success, I think. Yeah, Tier 3 intervention, really good. And actually, Regina Oliver, who's here, she did a great study, summarized some literature on that about how to intervene at Tier 3 for that. I also want to show you that middle and high school, if you raise your hand again, secondary people, this is not you screening every single kid, every single period. You pick one period a day, and that is the time of day when all the screening takes place. And there have been multiple studies to show that there is no additive benefit of the second rater. So and we've had people test that because there are questions like, is that true? Can I get just one teacher's perspective? And again, the studies that are done by multiple research teams show that one teacher independently rating kids on that one roster actually, again, yields data that predicts outcomes for kids. And some people ask about, is that even reasonable in the high school setting? And the answer is absolutely. So when you're looking at this, and how many of you have been involved in writing school improvement plans or strategic goals to see how kids are faring over time? You want to make sure that it is not how you feel. You want to have something that is accurate data. And it's not the only data that we want to have. We also want to have things like school climate data. We want to have the fidelity data. We want to look at all the happenings, but we want to make good instructional decisions about screening data. A couple things to remember before you screen, and I hope you leave here really excited in just a few minutes to hear what they're doing. You will not screen without a plan to intervene. At the same time, you do not have to be perfect either. We need to have a plan for moving forward, and I have watched sometimes where people are so nervous to launch screening, they're waiting years. Those kids don't go to that school anymore. We miss them, and it's heartbreaking, but we actually, with very little teacher time, can get information that can be used to shape instruction. And we want to do really good data-informed decision-making. Sometimes when people look at these things, they think, wow, 12th and 11th grade are really in good shape. But if you look carefully, we're losing those kids. So that's why it can't be the only data that we're looking at. We got to look at, are they still showing up? Are they attending? Have they dropped out? Have they opted out? So as you're thinking about these resources, and we'll go over these more tonight if you come to the poster session, but on PBIS.org, if you go to that drop down, and we'll help you find it, and come by the poster, you can just scan it. You'll see a variety of resources, and very shortly you'll see this updated one-page infographic where you can just scan everything. But we want to make sure that as you're listening to their journey, you know it is a journey, and we want to make sure you know that there's practical, easy-to-read resources about helping you guide your decision about how to select a tool, how to install it. You can look to see how to interpret it on ci3t.org. And Jen, would you mind raising your hand in the back? Not to call you out, but Jen and Mark Buckman made this wonderful resource about using the student risk screening scale. So it's like a technical manual about how to put it all together and use it. And there's a little drop down of resources that are also available there. And you want to stay current on the literature, because I think the best thing about the science that happens in community partnership relationships is we keep learning. And I really hope that at the end of my time, what is true today will not be true in 10 years. And so we need to make sure it's updated because we don't want to be making decisions based on old data, old practices. Although I am wearing the same color lipstick that I have worn, CoverGirl 542. I've worn it for the last 32 years since the first time I kissed my husband. Somebody would like to move me out of the 80s for my hair and get new lipstick, but not today. All right, so now we are going to hear from Amber and how they have put this into play in her district. Shout out to Amber.
Uh-oh. Don't break anything, Kathleen. Hi, everybody. My name is Amber Smith. I am the Director of Academic Intervention for Fort Mill Schools. We are in South Carolina, right on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina. Our district is one of the fastest growing in the state of South Carolina and has been for the last 20-odd years per capita. We have currently about 18,000 students and 20 schools, 11 elementary, 6 middle, 3 high. I've been in the district for 25 years, and when I started in the district, the town population was 15,000. My school population is 18,000 25 years later, if that gives you any indication about what's going on. So we learned a lot fast. And what we found is that we didn't have a lot of systems in place, and so that's what a lot of my work has been, because it's a lot easier to have things when there's only one elementary school the system is what that elementary school did, right? Whatever they decided, that's our system. And now that we've got 11, it doesn't work quite the same way. So, to say the least, right? So how did we get started on this journey? Well, in the fall of 2020, the state of South Carolina did an SEL screener symposium or presentation, and it was done by Zoom, and it was as exciting as you can imagine, listening to presentation after presentation of lots of different screeners, right? It was a whole lot of data and a whole lot of slides and a whole lot of sitting. And Kathleen Lane was the very last speaker in that presentation. And this ran from about 8 o'clock till 4 o'clock that day, and she was the very last presenter. And we stuck it out, and as soon as we finished, because we were all in our little separate spaces, my coordinator of psychological services, she and I both ran out of our offices and ran to each other, and we're like, we love her. As you have seen this morning, you know why we love her. And so we went and bought all the books and we had a 2-person book club. And yeah, it was literally us. We're like, we can do this. We need a system. We both agreed we needed a system. We needed to figure this out. And so we were like, what do we do? And so we did a 2-person book club, and we had a committee that was already working on MTSS and things like that. So we were already moving in this direction, but we felt like this really pulled all of these separate, siloed pieces that were semi-systematic, but not quite together. They didn't talk to each other. It was systems instead of system. And so we got together, we thought we were ready to do it, and we sent Kathleen an email, and it basically said, hi, we're Karen and Amber, and we're your biggest fangirls in the state of South Carolina. We think we're gonna do this. Are we crazy? And Kathleen answered us. I felt like I was emailing Taylor Swift. I was like, oh. But she answered. And she answered us, and she said, it just so happens we're working on a project. And so we started talking, and we ended up participating with a research partnership with them. And that has been really instrumental in our journey, because we were able to take all of these ideas that seemed really good on paper, but we didn't really have a conceptual understanding of deeply, and to have somebody walk us through that was super helpful. So what we started was in the fall of 2021, the 21-22 school year, we started the manual building process that the ladies alluded to earlier. So we spent an entire year with 11 elementary schools building manuals. And so that literally took the entire year. In high school and middle school, we just ignored them for a little while and just let them do their thing. And then when we started implementation year 1 with the elementary schools, we then moved into manual building with middle and high school. It was a slightly different process with middle and high school, but it was nice to be able to have some experience under our belt before we went to middle and high school, which is inherently more challenging because the moving pieces are just different, right? It's just different. It's not necessarily that they're harder or anything like that. It's just a different system. And so trying to make those make sense and make them flow pre-K through 12 in a way that was logical and meaningful is where we are. So this year we are at full implementation K-12, 20 schools. My book study partner no longer works in the district, so in that manual building year with middle and high school, I got a new person in that role, so she and I got to do it together. It was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I'm gonna say that out loud a few times and eventually I'm gonna believe it, but we got it. We started to move forward, and we felt like we were making progress. Elementary had done a lot of MTSS, ideas of intervention, things like that were already in place. Again, not necessarily systematic. Middle and high school had a little bit bigger leap to make for that. So if you ever ask, what did you do this summer? That first year question, like, how did you spend your summer vacation? I spent it looking at legislation from the state of South Carolina related to social emotional well-being, because in our state, there are some challenges, some questions about what social emotional learning means, what it is and what it isn't. And so there were some questions that were coming up related to what we were doing in schools. And so we had to spend a little time to make sure that what we were doing was aligned with legislation. So one is was originally Act 195, which created this profile of a South Carolina graduate. And you might not be able to see it very clearly, but it talks about world-class knowledge, which I always tell teachers, that's what you went to school to do. You thought you were going to come teach the children the things. That's what you went to school for. And then you got into the profession, and they added these 2 other things that you did not know you went to school for, which was world-class skills and life and career characteristics. And so a lot of our teachers come out feeling very prepared to do world-class knowledge and not very prepared to do the other two, but it's 2/3 of their job. So what do we do with that? And then in addition to that, most recently in 2018, we had MTSS legislation that also kind of tied in dyslexia screenings. I think a lot of states have kind of similar legislation moving on. And so that included a lot of literacy screening as the focus of it, but they also embedded language about social emotional well-being and behavior in there. So how I spent my summer vacation was looking at all of that and trying to make connections. And in that process, I had this moment where I realized that these two were connected. So one of the things that Kathleen has been very clear about during our manual building phase is that CI3T is not a thing. It is not one more thing on the plate. It is the plate. And so I started to have this vision of taking that MTSS triangle and just spinning it. You know, if you take those little things and you spin them and they look like they have a solid color? Well, take that triangle and spin it around. You end up with a plate. So we took that plate and used that as our baseline for how we talk about things. And then we thought about those pieces of the profile of a South Carolina graduate. They fit exactly where they go, in the same place. World-class knowledge is academics. Life and career characteristics is SEL. The world-class skills is behavior. They are the same. They are the same language, and when you look at them, you can see where they connect. So we made that connection for folks because they felt like, oh, CI3T is one more thing to do. I can't do CI3T. I'm like, there is no doing CI3T. It is how we determine what we're going to do. And so we started to make those connections for folks, and we looked back. We're a very high-achieving district. We're very fortunate. Our community and our population is very focused on education. They value education in a way that they are willing to spend money towards education, and that really benefits our district. And so we have students who perform very well. But even in our high-performing district, it's not 100%, right? We still have 25 to 35% of our students who are not meeting benchmarks according to our state assessments. So we had students that needed support. So we wanted to think about how we might be able to do that. And so we talked about state standards. We are also moving toward professional learning communities, PLCs, if that's language that means something to you as well, and talking about how those fit together. We already had some academic screeners in place at elementary, so we expanded those into middle school, and we're really still kind of playing around with our academic screener for high school. But we have a lot of things where we spend a lot of time working with teachers on high-quality academics. Again, that's the thing they showed up thinking that they were going to do. It's the other pieces that we have had to have a little bit more heavy lift on. So when we talk about professional learning needs for academics, really understanding what CI3T looks like at the grade bands, elementary, middle, and high school, really looking at removing silos, looking at literacy separate from math, separate from behavior, right? We were separating it all out and then wondering how are we going to support these kids in 12 different intervention groups that they need to participate in. Well, maybe that shouldn't be 12, right? Maybe they can go together. One of the phrases that I use a lot is a healthy triangle. I was like, so how healthy is our triangle? Does it look about 80-15-5? If it doesn't look like that, maybe our triangle's not so healthy and we need some more support. And so a phrase that anybody who works with me in my district will tell you is, you know, we're spending a lot of time sending out life preservers to save individual kids when we need to send a boat. And so instead of solving it all at tier 3, maybe we need to just get a tier 1 boat that is addressing that instead. And then one of the things that we noticed for us was that CI3T allowed us the opportunity to have a conversation about exit criteria. We had a lot of entry criteria, and then we just would never let those babies go, right? They became lifers. It was like their little gang that they all lived together forever. And so, because the teachers were like, oh, but they're not ready, I can't let them go yet. Because they weren't, you know, mastering, they weren't A+ students, they weren't the valedictorian yet, so let's just keep them in intervention for forever. And we had to talk about that, and we had to talk about what exit criteria would be a part of academic interventions. When we look at world-class skills, we saw an increase that first full year after COVID, chronic attendance, chronic absences, more referral rates, more suspensions. We just saw behavior issues that were happening, and people didn't know what to do about it. So we have implemented a PBIS framework. That is something that we are actively working on, talking about that school-wide expectation matrix. The way we're documenting behaviors were varied. And so when we would try to look at data across the district, we had one school that was like a kid didn't bring their pencil and that was going into our system. And somebody else, it was like you had to bring a weapon before you got in the system. So it was like, you're like, man, this school's in trouble, but really it was just the pencils, you know, like it really, it was that. And so we had to have a conversation of like, if you want to document pencils, that's fine, but where do we do that? How do we do that in a way that we can compare data in a way that is appropriate and allows us to actually make some decisions? And then we talked about high quality instruction. You see a lot of the pieces here, those low intensity supports were things that we needed to provide specific professional development on, and we've been able to do that through the CI3T.org website, because there's a lot of resources there that are absolutely publicly and freely available, and they are super helpful. For our behavior concerns, teaching behavior expectations, we got a lot of they should know that by now. And I remind them that if they did, they wouldn't need to be here. And sometimes with high school, they'll say, well, they should know that they're almost adults. And I said, you're right, they are. And this is our last chance to teach it to them before we don't have any say-so at all. So let's work on it. We can do this. And so that conversation has been one that we are shifting over time. Again, using those low-intensity strategies. For certain schools, it's just a focus on one. Like, let's just talk about behavior-specific praise until our head falls off, but let's get really good at it, and then we'll try something else. Responding to behavior using an instructional approach as opposed to a punitive approach is something that is a new idea for some of our folks, and examining our beliefs and practices related to consequences and punishment. You know, you may also have challenges where folks want the kids, they have to serve their time, they need the punishment for the consequence, whatever that is. To have that conversation, it shifts a little bit of thinking from maybe our own experiences in school or what we've always held on to as a strongly held belief. And so those are conversations that are hard to have, but they're worth having. And then when it comes to social emotional well-being, we talked about life and career characteristics. This data here, I know it's in narrative form, but what we noticed from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, we literally doubled elementary through high school every risk assessment category. Suicidal ideation, all threat assessments, everything. And in elementary, double the number of suicidal ideations for elementary. I was floored. I was like, we cannot, so we have to do something. So that conversation was really built around that component. So we've looked at a variety of curriculum measures. We use Harmony with our elementary students. And then middle school right now is Character Strong in second step, and we had a really great plan for high school, and then the State Department took away our access. So we are currently on the search for our high school version of this. So this is, you know, when I'm keeping it real, right? Like, we had a plan, and then the bottom fell out of the plan. So we are going forward with what we have for now. We do use the screener that Kathleen talked about. Now, she calls it SRSSIE, but I'm from South Carolina, and so we call it CERSI. And if anybody here from the South, the American South? Okay, so those of you might know that the word CERSI is a little gift, like just a little present, like I just brought you a little CERSI. So we think that, we think screening's the little gift that we give to schools so that they can get some information on their students. And then all of our SEL programs all are built around those 5 core competencies, and our interventions are built around those as well. We had to talk about what SEL means related to Tier 1 instruction. A conversation that we had to have with teachers was, you can teach SEL, you can teach some of those social emotional well-being skills, coping skills. That doesn't mean you have to be a mental health counselor. You don't have to be a mental health practitioner, right? You don't have to have that level of knowledge to be able to talk about it. One of the ways that I remind folks is many of us grew up in buildings or schools or experiences that had the everything I needed to learn I learned in kindergarten poster. That's SEL, right? That's a lot of what we're doing, especially at elementary, is teaching some of those things that we think most kids know that maybe they don't. And those go back to those low intensity strategies and really communicating with families about what SEL is and what it's not and what it is intended to do. Because I think there's some misunderstandings, miscommunication, and maybe some weaponization of that language in a way that is not fair. And I think it's appropriate for us to be able to talk about that and show where in not only legislation, but in a model like this, where it fits in. So when I think big picture, preparing, one of the things that our district did very well was we went through our accreditation process and also our strategic planning process. That's a 5-year cycle for our state. And those occurred at the same time. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got, and I saw it in a session earlier today, where somebody said a system of schools versus a school system, that was the feedback we got. We were a system that had lots of schools in it, but we were not a school system. And so that was one of the pieces of feedback we got. And so when we worked on our strategic plan, that was something, building systems that were more consistent across schools. That's fair, that's equitable, it's appropriate, and so that was built into our strategic plan. And so a lot of the work that I get to do now is directly supported by our strategic plan. So when people go, hey, I don't want to do that, not that anyone has ever said that, but if they ever thought that, then we have a place to say, this is part of our plan. We as a district are working on that. The staggered implementation was essential. There's no way I could have done this with 20 schools at one time. 11 was a lot all by itself. And then we had a laser focus on purpose and intent. Anytime people would ask, what is this about? We could go back and say, this is about providing kids access. This is about providing kids support. This is about making sure that we're making decisions for academic behavior and social emotional well-being. We were laser focused. So anything we did, there was no like, well, it kind of does this and it kind of, no, we knew exactly what we were working on. As far as the implementation, interconnected systems have been really helpful in working across departments. I work very closely with my special services department. I also work very closely with our student services, which is behavior, suspension, those kinds of things. We have been very tight with them, and it has been, the current director of that department went through the entire manual building process within elementary school, so she knows it in and out, and it has been so helpful. Instead of having siloed things separated, and then, we make all these decisions about behavior, but then it goes this other direction. She knows exactly what it is. That conversation is consistent, which is helpful. And our research partnership for implementation has been beyond helpful. When I think long-term, consistency and predictability. We want to get to the point where they just know, oh, it's this time of year, we're going to do our survey now. Oh, it's this time of year, this is when we do our screening. And what was interesting is I had a meeting at the beginning of the year that was a multi-grade. So I had some elementary principals or elementary schools in there. I had some middle and some high school. And one of my elementary schools said, hey, when are we going to get CERC started this year? Like, they just knew. And this is literally year 2 of implementation for them. And they just knew to expect it. And I was like, see, middle schools, it's not scary. Because they weren't upset. They were just like, yeah, it's great. They were ready to go. And then I think the other piece is that responding to data. Like you said, we've got a wealth of data. It's what do we do with it? And I think building systems that we can then look at that data and make some decisions about it, we can do that within the confines of this system that we've built. And we can also say, you guys probably know people in your district maybe go to a conference and they see a really cool shiny object and they want to decide to bring that shiny object back to the district. Because we have this framework in place, we can say we already have that shiny object taken care of. Or if we do that shiny object, we need to take this one out. Like, we can actually make decisions that are built around a framework instead of just whatever the shiny thing is. And we can make those decisions really well because of that system, and we can use our data to help us make decisions about what to keep and what to abandon and what's the most important move for us. That is the story of my district, and now Jessica Poppy is going to tell the story of her district.
Thank you, Amber. So, my name's Jessica Poppy, and I am from I'm not from Cedar Woolley. I live in Cedar Woolley, Washington, and we are about 45 minutes from beautiful British Columbia. So we're closer to Vancouver than we are to Seattle. It's a very small, well, I don't want to say very small, but we are a much smaller school district. We have 4,500 students, 7 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 2 high schools, and one of those high schools is an alternative ed school. And so this is part of our journey. It all started at a conference. We saw a shiny thing, and it was Dr. Lane. we brought her home. So this started back in 2018. Washington State created many opportunities for educators to get together, and they called it MTSS Fest. And we started talking about what does this look like, this MTSS framework for our schools. Everybody knew RTI. A lot of people knew PBIS. So how was this any different than those 2 initiatives that we had seen in the past? One of our school psychs went to a breakout session and heard all about CI3T. And she brought it back to the team and said, this is different. This is different than what we have heard because of the 3 prongs, the academic, behavior, and social at Tier 1. That was a new idea to us at our district. And we knew we didn't have screening data. We had other data to tell us the kids needed support. And we also had lots of data that said our teachers need support. Kathleen, thank you for saying that teachers are accurate. I am thrilled to see that the data is coming out in the research that acknowledges the professionalism of our educators, knowing this and having the numbers to support that. So well done. So we reached out to Dr. Lane, because if you've seen her before or know her, you probably have her cell phone number in your cell phone. And our assistant superintendent called her up and said, hey, we're really interested. And that led to many conversations and a team being put together around moving forward with our implementation. So our Washington State MTSS values came out in 2019, and I'm not going to read a lot of this to you, but I would like you to see number 3 at the bottom. And it says, delivers comprehensive supports that consistently meet every student's needs and accelerate student academic, social, emotional, and behavioral learning. It's like they took a page out of the ci3t.org website. So this is our focus. It is in legislation also, so thank you for mentioning bringing it back to what is in our guidance from the state. Our timeline is a little different. So thank you to what happened to us in, a couple years ago, COVID. All right, so we were ready to go, 2019 to 20. That's when we wanted to start. I went out to Kansas, June of 2019. I was a team of 1. And I met Kathleen, and I said, we're doing all the schools. And she said, oh, honey, no, you're not. Very nicely, she said it. Because we didn't have certain things in place. We needed to get tools in place, maybe people, because I was a team of 1, but things like a data system. How are we going to collect our data? The screeners. So we started small, and we decided to do 2 elementary schools, a middle school, and a high school, because why not do K-12? And that actually worked out really well for us. Because when you're in your learning year, it opens up many opportunities for conversations, many opportunities to have those hard conversations outside of the teacher's lounge, where you're sitting there with research, with protocols to guide you to make decisions. Because I know in my district and the teachers that I work with, they are ready to make a plan of action. So we know what to do at times, but we don't know how to pull through and pull forward. So as you can see, we've got 2 different timelines going on. We pushed through COVID. We kept going. So I had 4 schools in implementation 2021, and then I had 5 elementary schools in their learning year. And we just kept going, and we screened. We screened right through everything on Zoom. We screened right through as the kids were coming back part-time. We screened the kids that were back in school, and we still had kids out on Zoom. We did it for academics, and we did it for behavior. Then we got to be a part of Project Enhance. And that started last year. This will be our 2nd year. It's our elementary schools. And what that did for us is, I don't want to get a little emotional, but I might. Our district is so very grateful to the work because we've got support. I've been a team of 1 for a while. So to have partners with Dr. Lane and her team to guide our schools in those conversations, to have those implementation plans. Yes, you have. How many people have written a SIP and really haven't looked at it after you submit it, right? Yeah, you're being recorded. Wait, I've never done that, in case my superintendent's watching. But having an implementation plan that is live, that sits on the desks of people, that sits in their binders, because we're constantly referring back to it. People to remind us, go back to that. What is that entrance criteria for Tier 2? What is it? How do you know, is a kid ready to exit? How do we know we've got that in our manual? So we are ecstatic that we get to continue this. Hopefully we'll get to continue it with 2.0 in our secondary schools, because they are sitting in the wings going, what about me? What about me? As they keep pushing forward with their implementation plans and putting them into place, they want that support from the teams. All right, so screening wise, we didn't, like I said, we didn't have an academic screener, K-8, so we bought into iReady, and what I want to say is it took us a year to do this because that's part of the learning process year. You need to look and see what screening tool is going to match the need of your districts and maybe your budget. And then we did choose Navi for 9/12, 2021, and decided very quickly that was not something our students are responding to. And ironically enough, it was a decision made by one person. So now we're back at the table with secondary folks and the leadership teams looking at options, because we know it's gonna go well for us if we do that. Behavior, I say we resurrected PBIS. We had spent a lot of time with the University of Oregon, which isn't too far from us, in trainings. So our district was a PBIS district, and I say was is because we did it for a while, and then it slowly fizzled away. So bringing back those strategies. Integrating attendance and office referrals. I'm glad you mentioned how do you document those behaviors. We were all over the place also, and our definitions of what we were recording was very different from school to school. So putting that into place, finding a computer program to help us input that data and then output those reports that we love so we can analyze what it's looking like at the district, at the building, grade level, classroom level, and individual student level. And then building teams K-12, we redesigned our Tier 2 intervention teams, Tier 3. Do you guys have anything like that? A bunch of people come to a table, there's concerns about students. Oftentimes it's a pipeline to SPED. So we redesigned that so it would not be. It is a pipeline to support. Because, and that I can't wait to read the data that shows the reduction in SPED referrals. Social emotional, we have evidence-based curriculum at all of our schools now, which is really exciting. And we have been screening with the Thursday. Okay, trying to get it right. Since 2021, so we have lots of comparative data to look at as we move forward. Something that I think is well, let's see. Let me look at my slides. All right, professional learning. This is what I want to talk about. When we started with the academic screeners and the SRS SIE, my teachers were incredibly overwhelmed with all the data. We started data dive meetings with no protocol. I don't recommend that. I didn't realize how vulnerable data was for my teachers. I knew it, but I didn't really internalize it until I saw the pain and embarrassment that they put on themselves and that pressure. So really making sure that as a district, we had guidance and we had coaching and we practiced. We practiced with data that didn't matter. So people could go through the questions and talk about it, and then we slowly got into the topics that teachers were comfortable with. Reading. Teachers are really comfortable about talking about reading. They're pretty comfortable talking about math. They are not so much about behavior and social emotional learning. So doing that K-12 and supporting their learning to do the framework of CI3T. We do twice, social validity and treatment integrity for the adults, and Kathleen was talking about that. That data allows administrators and the teacher leadership teams of the buildings to design professional development on a tiered level. So we provide Tier 1, everybody gets it. Tier 2, maybe some people need a little bit more. Tier 3, maybe we need to have some one-on-one coaching. And that has changed how we have operated in our schools. So we talk about, this morning we heard about the 6 components of PBIS, and that last one was ongoing coaching. My district was rich in teachers on special assignment, so we had lots of TOSAs. After COVID, we have 0. So it is really the responsibility of all of us to coach each other, and it's allowed my principals the opportunity to get in and coach in the moment with the low-intensity strategies, which we are seeing huge gains in confidence in teachers being able to deliver those to our students. Let's see. I think that's it.
Probably have way more to say. Let's give a shout out to Amber and Poppy. Very good. I am very impressed, and I love to hear their journey and how very, very different it is. And I do want to say there is not a one-size-fits-all with this. So they've built it, they're implementing it, and they're rich in this data-informed approach. And I want to emphasize that part of our job when we think about introducing systematic screening is making sure that we're confident that we know how to guide people. We don't want to rush to screen. We want to do that with intentionality. And when you work in a system, I love the threads that you guys were talking about doing what's healthy for the adults as well. Pre-pandemic, we did a series of studies that were led by Wendy Oakes and others, and they were at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And after 2 years of getting CI3T in place, teachers reported lower levels of burnout than the national average and a higher sense of efficacy in their teaching, not in every domain, but in several. And I think we have to pay attention to that. Like sometimes people are hesitant to move forward with tiered systems because they're worried it's going to burn out the teacher. It's going to burn out the teacher if we don't, because it is too hard, it is too complicated without being efficient. I want to show you some places to leave you with here. You've got to this presentation on the website from this conference. You also have it on ci3t.org. On this page, you can go learn about other systematic screening tools. And we featured the SRSSIE, SRSSIE. I want to be clear, I'm not saying I think that is the very best screening tool in the entire world. It is free access. It has excellent predictive validity. And we have a new paper that just came out that established measurement invariance, which means it functions the same way for boys and girls, kids that are white and kids that are black, kids that are white and kids that are of color. It also functions the same for kids who are Hispanic and not Hispanic, and for kids that are receiving special ed and those who are not. And that is true for elementary, middle, and high in fall, winter, and spring. And when you talked about closing gaps in performance from different groups of kids, we need to close gaps in access. Screening's important to that. So explore something that works for the value and the culture of your community. Do not assume that your screening tool is going to work, anything that you pull off the shelf. You want to do a little bit of a deep dive. Go check out the resources that are there. And then once you've selected it, and we can go learn some more from Rebecca in our next set of conversations and at the poster sessions, you have editable, not edible, but editable ones like protocols. You can download these and edit these for your own setting. So like setting them up at the district level. And then what do you say on the day of? And I'm really excited that we have this resource. This is the one I was mentioning that Jen helped to lead on our team. And we have, as part of another project, Project Screen, which we are in our final year of, we will be making some really cool tricked out resources that will launch on 6/24/2024. Write that down, 6/24/2024. And they get to use them right now as part of this research. But in the pages that you see here, it's going to open up for you. And I really want to give a shout out. You heard this morning that PBIS 6 just launched, and I'm beyond thrilled. And I've been able to be a small part of the wonderful things that the center's been doing for a long time. These resources are to guide you, like once you've made the decisions about communicating with your community. They need to know all the things that you're collecting. They're our students, it's their children. So we want to make sure that we're communicating and we are prepared for the questions. So we hope you'll come join us in just a little bit to have an opportunity to look out these other resources. And if you want more access to conversations and free access professional learning, you can go on this website and you can sign up for these. And if you are somebody that needs BCBA units, we offer those for free as a service and a thank you for people that are doing that. They're 2-hour sessions. We host 6 a year. We also have monthly drop-in that is not recorded, and those are just like if you have questions about screening, come and do it. And if you're inspired by this work and you want to go back to school, shameless plug, consider coming to be in Project Epic, like what Rebecca and others are doing. We have opportunities in Arizona and in Kansas, and I know this is being recorded, but I do want to say the cost of living is lower in Kansas. So thank you for being here so much, and thank you for these wonderful people, and thank you for your time. We'll see you soon.